turn it off, it'll sound good. It will not sound natural, and you get into the amp in the room kind of stuff because we're working in this kind of scenario, direct front of house. We're trying to do it like you would do it if you were in a studio. So that's pretty good raw tone. I'm like, all right, okay, that can work. For me, I like to have a little space. So if we turn on the stock one, it's got that typical kind of a reverb thing. So if you ran into that and you tried to go play that live right now, that's going to push you back in the mix, and it's going to bury you, and you don't want it that way. But the problem is if you turn that off, at least to me, and this is just the way that I do it, that's just too in your face. It's right up on you, and to me it doesn't feel natural. So what I like to do with it, and I'm going to leave it serial right now, and we'll get into all this serial parallel stuff today for sure, is just turn it down. So I'm just using the mouse wheel. And then I'm going to go over and I do the little thing. Now I take, basically we'll stay with the medium room because it's fine. And the way that I shortcut things like this, I take this down to about 10. And the reason I do that is because on this side of it are the early reflections. So if you're playing with the cabinet in the room, the first thing you're going to hear that cabinet bouncing off the floor, off any wall boundaries in the ceiling, depending how far away or close you are to it. So to me, it's only natural, and I don't know if certain people on the internet would agree with me, because everything has to be their way, and they know everything about everything. But the way I do it is I just try things like a monkey. It's like good, better, worse, better, worse. And by trial and error, I came up with this kind of a situation. Where I roll that up, I roll this down, I take this up to about 80. And that's just shortcutting it, and all that was me monkeying around and figuring if it sounds better. So this is where I ended up. So you won't hear that until you take it away. So you might not hear reverb, and for me personally, I don't want to hear it. But it's there. There's enough of it. Maybe that's even too much for me, but it's all right. But the thing I don't like about that is when you hear that tail, it's got that tss to it. I don't need to hear that personally. It drives me nuts. So if you look at the high cut over here, which is an EQ window, all this does is reverb. It doesn't EQ your signal. Drop it down. So I just created a darker room, and that's all I did. And I might take some of the mud out and just go cut it around there. For me, my ear, that sounds right. So now I've got an amp, I've got a cab, and I've got that cab situated in space in front of me. That just sounds and feels a little more natural. And that's the key. Now everything from here, it's a little bit simpler. Because the way that I look at it, the Axe Effects, what that grid offers you, is it's not only walking into a music store with everything the Axe Effects offers. It's like walking into a studio and all the options you have there with routing. You can put things, and if you look at this routing, it's kind of interesting because they have the chorus and flanger after the cab. And that's kind of hard to pull off unless you're going into a board and then you're running all the effects post. So you're running it dry and they've got them. Now, one of the reasons they do that is if you don't run a stereo cab, and I run a mono cab, and I take the flanger or the chorus and throw it in front of the amp, that mono cab's going to sum it in the mono. So if you need it to be in stereo, it really has to be after the cab, assuming you're not running a stereo cab. And most guys that I run into when they play live, there isn't a lot of time, and a lot of the clubs that I play in, if they even have the guitars in the PA, do not run in stereo. And I have a problem with stereo, to be honest with you, because unless you're sitting in the middle of that room, you're not going to detect that this is stereo guitar signal. All you're going to do is be sitting on one side or the other, and you're just going to hear the prominence of whatever side you're on. You're only going to hear it in mono anyway. So don't overthink it. A lot of guys will say, well, what kind of output routing do you do on the hardware and all that stuff? I just run it stereo. And I take one line out, and I feed that to front house. I take the other line out of input one. I run that into my power monitor. Mine has a volume control on it. I just turn it up how loud I want it after we get the level set from the front house. It's just that easy for me, and then I'm done. I don't have to think about it. So all I want to do really quick is kind of show, so we walked into the music store, we've chosen the amp we want to use and the cab we want to use. So how can we make this cab a little bit better? When you use the original stuff in here, like the red wire, the trick that I always had for the red wire, I think that sounds pretty good, but let's try and make it better really easy. We have the low cut and the high cut. All I do with own hammer is I take them up to about 8, not own hammer, but red wire, and I take this down to about 8. And I find overall this just works. In a mix better. I just cut through better. And I can use the red wire. There's nothing wrong with them. There was even a recent post where some guy he's just heartbroken because no one's talking about red wire anymore, and to him, red wires. These are all just tools. They're tools in the toolbox. And you just choose what you have. If you prefer one over, it doesn't mean the other one sucks. It just means you're using different tools. You don't have to make it personal. One of the things that I like to do are use all those mixes, and we showed earlier some of the different ways to do that. So I'm going to change the cab to mono, turn the mic off, and I'll use the cab that I normally use. Now I used to have an F. Wagner XC, it was one of my favorite amps. And my Wagner, I had the 212 and I had the 412, and they both came with finished 30s. So to me, that's the kind of sound that it's supposed to have. We didn't have those in. Matt, do we have Cadillac still up? Took out.
He's at top.